A very good morning to everyone. Corporate Relations and Placement Team of Healthcare Management Program at Goa Institute of Management welcomes Dr. Purav Gandhi for a virtual interactive session. Purav sir is the founder and CEO of HealthArc Insights. He has over 11 years of experience in healthcare management consulting. Before HealthArc Insights, he had been associated with major consulting organizations like Nagarro, Adveno Healthcare, and Deloitte. Sir was also the scientific advisor for Coverage Health platform by Deloitte and is currently a guest faculty of healthcare strategy and healthcare informatics at IIM Kozhikode. Sir has expertise in growth strategy, product strategy, as well as go-to-market approach with a specialization in health information technology and real-world data analytics. Sir also has a great understanding of identifying and developing innovative healthcare IT solutions. Sir also holds an MBBS degree and has done his PGDM from IIM Kozhikode and also has a specialization in pharmacogenomics from Stanford University. It's an honor to have Sir along with us today, and we would be glad to learn from his vast experience over the years. Sir, we look forward to learn a lot from you in this session. Kindly enrich our students with your expertise. Over to you, sir.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time. Very excited to see everyone's faces here on a Saturday morning. Really appreciate all of you taking the time. I wish we could have done this in person. That would have been a fantastic experience, but nonetheless, we'll try to make the best of what we have here. In terms of today's session, I thought I'll talk about one of my favorite topics, which is AI in healthcare. I'll start with a brief introduction, talk a little bit about our company. Then we'll talk about AI in healthcare, some of the latest trends and considerations. We'll try to keep that conversation for 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'd love to take questions from all of you. All right. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. We can see your screen.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I'll start with a brief introduction. So my name is Purav Gandhi. I was born and brought up in Ahmedabad. Lived majority of my life in Ahmedabad. Right now, also based here. I'm a physician by education, so I studied medicine from Gujarat University, NHL Medical College. After that, I decided to pursue an MBA. Went to IIM Kozhikode, spent a couple of years at IIM Kozhikode, beautiful campus. Did my MBA there. Then spent next 5 years of my career with Deloitte. Initially was a strategy consultant, then was a founding member of one of their analytics ventures called as Converge Health. That analytics venture or a startup was the catalyst. Based on that, I felt like this is something I wanted to start a company on my own. Started one company called as Remedy Social. Didn't go so well, but found an early exit, saved my face. That venture was bought up by 1mg. And after that, I started a consulting firm of my own called as HealthArc Insights. We've been running this company now for almost 5 years, a team of 50 members today. We'll talk a little bit more about HealthArc Insights later. Just on the personal front, I love traveling. I've traveled to more than 30 countries. Goal in life is to ensure that I travel at least 100 countries. Love food. One of my favorite achievements, I think, back in the time when Zomato was a food review website, I was one of the top 10 reviewers on Zomato, and still consider that as a highlight of my personal achievement. A little bit about HealthArc. So HealthArc's a small consulting firm, which kind of takes pride in solving some of the most complex healthcare problems by having deep domain expertise, scientific rigor. Also, unlike many consulting organizations, one of the things we take pride in is solving problems end to end. So not just building a strategy for 4 to 8 weeks and walking out, but actually sticking with some of the clients, helping them operate their business, solve that entire problem for a longer period of time. Built a very good team. I'm super thankful for the team that we have today. Some of them are ex-consultants from companies like Deloitte or ZS. or IQVIA. Some of them come from medical backgrounds. Some of them are engineers and MBAs, PhDs, biostatisticians. So that's a bit about us. Uh, Today, our company operates in 4 verticals. The main one, which we started with, was strategy. We do a lot of go-to-market strategy, landscape assessment projects, business forecasting, modeling. Digital is one of the top trends around which we have been working with. We also do a lot of analytics work. Uh, Analytics is a vast field, but one of the key areas where we are unique is real world data, which is taking medical data from hospitals, from claims, insurance companies, and then trying to get scientific insights out of that. In order to take some of our projects and implement them successfully, we have started building some technology expertise because, as you'll all observe in your careers, management and strategy is great, but nowadays technology has become a very important pillar. So all management folks need to have a bit of knowledge of technology. And then AI is another area where we do a lot of work. That's the topic for today. One of the most interesting things that we take pride in at HealthArc is all the countries marked in the dark blue. These are the countries where we have worked in. So for such a small firm, we have worked in 60 plus countries. Um, this requires understanding local geography, local language, the structure of how healthcare operates in each country. It's very different across countries. Insurance system is super different. The markets are different. Top players and competition is different, and still having the ability to figure out these countries, figure out these markets, and successfully help clients is something which we consider very unique. Uh, just some of the logos or top brands we work with. We work with some of the top pharma companies like Pfizer, J&J, Roche, Boehringer Ingelheim, Gilead. We support a lot of top consulting firms like Deloitte, ZS, IQVIA, and partner with them on many projects. Work with some of the other large companies like Walmart, IBM. And then we also do a bit of work for some of the startups like 1MG, some venture funds like India Health Fund. This is a mix of clientele that we have today. Generally, uh, this is one of, again, for a company which is as small as us, we do have a lot of top tier clients, and it puts in a lot of responsibility. So it's very exciting to work with these clients. At the same time, be responsible enough to ensure we deliver top-notch quality to them. That's a bit about HealthArc and an introduction. Now we can park that aside and talk about the topic for today, which is AI in healthcare. So I'll start with the relevance of why we are even talking about AI. Right? It's everywhere. Um, it's a common phrase and a joke, but at the same time, a serious statement as well, where many people do not understand AI. So they find a complex problem. A human is not able to digest or understand it, and then they say, we'll apply AI. What part of AI will we apply? How will we do it? Does not matter. It's very easy to say, apply AI, get it done. But that's not enough for people who want to be in the top in management industry, in healthcare. Having a better understanding or grasp of AI is necessary. You cannot just say that apply AI and walk away. So go back a little bit in time. Around 1980s, 1990s, this trend started where they said that, look, no matter what field you work in, you can be a physicist, you can be a scientist, you can be a businessman. Basic understanding of personal finance is necessary. Everyone has to understand it. And for management folks, it's a must. So that the word was. Then we went a little bit beyond that and said that by around 2000, 2005, when I was studying medicine, they said that, look, whether you are a medical professor, whether you are a banker, whoever you have to know how to operate computers. You cannot present on overhead projectors anymore. Everybody needs to know how to operate a laptop or computer. Fast forward it to 2010, they said that everybody needs to understand a bit of technology. If you are a management professional and don't understand technology, that is not acceptable. It's not an excuse. and I'm a strategy guy. I don't know technology. Everyone has to know basics of technology. Fast forward it to today and next 5-10 years, everyone has to understand the basics of AI. It's not an excuse that we do not understand AI. At least some part of it does not need that all of us need to hands-on write down code. But in your jobs, in your roles, in your workplace, when there is a project, there is a new solution to be implemented, not even understanding how AI operates and just keeping it as a black box is not sustainable. It's not a good career recipe. All of us need to know enough to be dangerous, and hence the importance of this topic today. AI is a science which has been around for a while. So I will start with a very basic definition, right? AI is something which is an intelligence which is demonstrated by machines as opposed to natural intelligence of humans. So machine producing some type of intelligence, right? Any system that perceives its environment, its surrounding, and based on that takes actions to maximize the chance of achieving its end goal is called as AI. And we can go on, right? There are many definitions of AI. But essentially, the operating word is intelligence demonstrated by a machine. And what is intelligence? It's the perception of environment, perception of your surrounding. And based on that, trying to achieve an end goal, not just taking an action, but an action to achieve an end goal. That is what when a machine does. It's considered as artificial intelligence because generally, this is something which only humans would do, machines would not do. Right? So, what are examples of AI in our daily life? So, when you unlock your phone by putting your face in front of it, that's AI. It reads your face, it marks few coordinates and says that, okay, this is Purab or this is Aditya or someone. Right? When you talk to Siri or Google or Alexa, that is artificial intelligence. It not only translates your voice into text, but it also neutralizes your dialect, your language, and still translates that machine. If your description is inaccurate, it tries to find the nearest match based on some pattern, based on knowing you. Right? Smart home appliances, they know that you are not sitting in a room. Hence, they switch off the light. Or they see sunlight coming in, so the AC starts putting in more power and blowing more wind. That is intelligence, right? Predicting the next wave of COVID, and many more. So these are examples of AI in general life. And it's important to recognize that these are examples of AI, but what part of it is artificial intelligence and what is normal electronics, because not everything is AI. Let us take some examples of healthcare. So very basic example is chatbots, which are symptom checkers, right? So you put in your symptoms and the chatbot says that, okay, based on your symptom, it asks you 5 more questions. It suggests that you should talk to such and such doctor or take such and such remedy. AI-based diagnostics. So now all these famous companies you would have heard, Cure AI or Nirame or few others, Sigtuple. In US, there are a bunch of them. They look at an X-ray and are able to suggest a diagnosis. They look at a pathology slide and are able to suggest a diagnosis. And this is not simple rule-based thing, right? That if red, give this diagnosis, if green, give that diagnosis. It's more complex. It looks at this image and identifies that, hey, this is a CT scan of brain. Within the brain, it says that this is the left lobe, this is the right lobe. So it identifies orientation. Then it identifies that this dark mark is a hemorrhage. Now, to identify that is dark, it looks at the surrounding colors and says that, okay, based on that, this is darker in intensity. So it applies layers of intelligence and decision making. Clinical decision support, customizing the dose of a medicine for every patient based on their weight, height, other medicines they are taking, suggesting what next steps to take for each patient. Right? These are all examples. Robotic surgery is another great example. I'll tell you a story on robotic surgery. It's fascinating. One could think that what is so intelligent about robotic surgery and why would it be considered as AI? So, the first robot, right, a surgical robot, was called as the Da Vinci robot. And I had a fanboy moment in my life. So the first the surgical robot was built at Stanford Research Institute, SRI, in San Francisco. Uh, this is the same institute that developed the internet, that developed Siri, that developed a bunch of other landmark technologies. They developed the computer mouse. Back in 1960s, there was a demo that they did called as the future of work. And at that time, they predicted that there would be video conferences and people would work over video conference calls over the internet. So they literally 50, 70 years ago predicted the future of work. And this institute, within their medical science wing, developed the first surgical robot called as the Da Vinci robot. So when I visited a couple of years back, I met the scientist whose father had invented the Da Vinci robot. And then this guy has been a researcher for 30 years. And when we met him, we asked him that, what are you working on? And he said that he's working on a surgical robot. So he said, that's an old technology. It's been around for 20 years, the surgical robot. What new are you doing? They said that, look, surgical robots are very complex, right? They require a very high amount of data, or they require an operator. So these guys had a funding from the Department of Defense to build a surgical robot which can operate in a battlefield. So in battlefield, the connections are pretty poor. And hence you would have at best a 2G network. Right? So a 2G network can carry a text message. A 2G network cannot carry video, sound, or any complex information. So now the surgical robot, when it identifies a soldier who is wounded in battleground and is bleeding, the surgical robot has to identify, first of all, what part of that soldier's body is bleeding through a camera. Now then, the robot has to reach there and identify that in that part, which procedure should the robot perform to, let's say, suture a bleeding or put a patch on it or do something around it, right? So the robot has to figure out the orientation, where to stand next to the soldier, how to intervene on that soldier, identify the right body part, right procedure. And the robot might not be able to make all the decisions. So here, the robot would also want to interact back with a surgeon. But the robot only has 2G connectivity network. So the robot can at best send message information equivalent to a text message. And by going back and forth with such simple information in a time-sensitive situation when somebody is bleeding to death, how could that robot interact with the doctor and perform on its own in a battlefield? So this was the problem that they were solving. And now you can imagine how complicated this is, what kind of intelligence would such a platform require. So surgical robots are again a whole new technology where AI is applied to a great extent to reach at places where humans cannot, do things which humans cannot. The idea is not to replace a surgeon, right? But the idea is to treat a patient where a surgeon cannot reach. The surgeon can never reach there. So, and actually, very interestingly, a lot of AI happens in academia, in labs, but a lot of AI happens in defense, and all these technologies come then to real life. So, do you know how, for the first time, this the phone unlocking technology was discovered? That was built for soldiers in the beginning. So, when the Americans were fighting the war in Afghanistan, the soldiers would run and want to reach back to their bunker. But a lot of enemy soldiers could also get into the bunker. So they developed this technology where if the soldier reaches the bunker, then puts his fingerprint and the bunker opens, it's quite late, it's time consuming. So now from far, like 50 feet away, when the soldier is running, the bunker does iris recognition of American soldiers, opens only if it's an American soldier, or does not open if it's an Afghan soldier. And that technology, after a few years, was then commercialized to Samsung, and then Samsung put in iris recognition technology to lock and unlock their phones. the noise cancellation headphones, right, that we all use now. This was first time built for fighter pilots who are flying on a fighter jet, and it's a two fighter jet, and so two pilots have to talk to each other. There's a lot of noise in the cockpit, and if they have to communicate, you need to be able to cancel the machinery noise. So that technology was built, and then now it is applied in all headphones from Bose and Jabra and whatnot. And all these are AI, right? Because they are able to differentiate between the normal and the intended. So the background noise and what you are trying to communicate. So just some examples of AI, right? Uh, Before we get into AI in healthcare, and you know a lot of examples of AI in healthcare, but it's important to understand the evolution of AI. So a little bit of history of AI. So AI is not new. We'll talk about the 10 landmark moments in the history of AI and how it has evolved. Right? So in 1942, Isaac Asimov wrote the three laws of robotics. And these were very simple laws. The first law was that any robot should not harm a human being. Then the robot should carry the task suggested to it to serve the master, which is a human being. And then the third was that the robot should do it in a way where it does not harm itself, but without breaking the first and the second law. And this laid the foundation for everything that we do today in AI, and these three laws still hold true. Then many of you might have seen the movie Imitation Game. This was based on Alan Turing's paper around imitation game in 1950. And this was a simple theory or a game invented where you uh, where he figured a game where a machine cannot build a human being by answering simple questions, and then he posed a challenge that if a machine can beat a human being at answering these questions, and by beat it means you can't identify whether a human being or machine is answering those questions, that would be a perfect machine. Actually, no one's beat that game even today, though AI has evolved significantly. In 1956, Dartmouth University held the first conference on artificial intelligence ages ago. Uh, Frank Rosenwald built what is called as a perceptron, which now kind of is the foundation for what we today call as neural networks. Um, then came the downtime in AI. So in 1970s, the British there was this report published and discussed in British Parliament around downside of AI. This LI report was kind of one of the big challenges in the history of AI, and they said that AI had no future. Uh, it continued. Digital corporations still built stuff around AI, but Xerox, Apple, IBM came in, and digital corporate equipment corporation collapsed. And again, everyone thought that AI had no future. Surprisingly, IBM, because of which Digital Equipment Corporation had collapsed, built Deep Blue. Deep Blue was the machine that beat Gary Kasparov at chess, and then everyone thought that everything is possible in AI. Then in 2011, neural networks were able to identify a cat by just looking at a picture. They would identify the pattern. Like these are the eyes, these are the ears, these are the whiskers, and just know that it's a cat. And that laid the prototype for neural networks and, in general, the ability to identify beyond text, go into images, go into videos, go into sound. Uh, Geoffrey Hinton then unleashed the entire neural network. And then recently, AlphaGo, which is a computer, defeated Lee Sedol, who's the champion at this game called as Go. For those of you who do not know Go, Go is similar to chess, but way more complicated than chess. So the number of pieces on the board is much larger than chess. And hence, what happens is the permutations and combinations around the number of moves that you can make is infinitely larger than chess. So when IBM's Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov at chess, the way it had done was it had studied some 3 crore odd moves from historically best chess players, and based on that, it would identify the best potential move. But the way AlphaGo worked was a whole new level. So what it did was it did not study all the moves. It studied all the moves, but it did not just use all those moves. it understood the rules of the game, and based on that, built its own moves. So when this tournament was held, uh, it identified new moves which were unprecedented, never used in the game of Go, because the machine was doing a whole new level of math. All the best Go players would try to win by a large margin. But this machine identified that it does not need to win by a large margin, it just needs to win. So it would calculate all the moves in a way where it would always win, but with a small margin. And it unrevealed whole new strategies around how the game should be played. And then this company, DeepMind, was acquired by Google to use the technology for research in various areas. There is a beautiful award-winning movie called as AlphaGo. It's for free on YouTube. I would highly encourage anyone who is interested in AI to watch the movie. So based on that, basically, and I'll try to be a little faster in interest of time, there are 7 layers of artificial intelligence, right? Historically, everything was rule-based artificial intelligence. Then machines would build contextual awareness of their surroundings, what's going on, and based on that, then it would build domain-specific expertise. So now a machine has expertise in cancer detection, a machine has expertise in finance, a machine has expertise in prescribing medicines. Then there is a reasoning system. So this is something like a driverless car, right? The machine would reason that should I kind of take a left turn or right turn? How do I avoid traffic? How do I optimize one thing or other? Then there is artificial general intelligence. So the machine now thinks broadly, right? The machine thinks not only about these things, but it thinks about the mood of a person. It thinks about broader social implications. So machine truly starts thinking about like a human. Not only does its own task, but thinks in a broader way. Then there is super intelligence, which is things which human cannot do. So the machine would think of how to solve poverty, how to solve world hunger, how to drive world peace. And then singularity, where machines and humans become one. So today we are at stage 2, 3, and 4 in the domain of artificial intelligence. Despite of heavy investments, 5 and 6 are still elusive, and 7 is an ideal state. It's an infinity. Just another slide on where all AI is kind of in the techniques used in AI, right? So there's machine learning, so predictions. Then natural language processing, so trying to look at text and classify, translate text. Speech recognition, which we talked about, robotics, and machine vision or imaging. This one's an interesting. So for students, right, when you try to apply AI in your life, there's a spectrum of analytics, which is very important to understand, and then slot your problem into one of these 4. The first one is descriptive, right? So look at data and just the ability to describe what happened. So look at data and say there are 4 customer segments or patient segments. That's descriptive analytics. Diagnostic, why did it happen? It happened because the patient had taken a lot of sugar, so it developed diabetes. Or this happened because the patient had an unhealthy lifestyle. And so now it's diagnostic. Predictive, what will happen in the future? So based on historical trends that I have looked at, I believe that this person will live for 5 more years or will fall sick in 10 years. And then prescriptive, based on all this, if the person takes X medicine or burns 3,000 calories, he or she will do well. So this is the spectrum, and the level of complexity obviously goes on increasing from descriptive all the way to prescriptive. The risk also increases. So in prescriptive, you are going to take an action. And because you are going to take an action, you need higher degree of validation. You need higher degree of proof that whatever you are going to do works. Versus if you are describing, you do not need that proof. So this is just about AI in healthcare. Now, let us talk about where all AI is applied in healthcare with more concrete spectrum. So the first area where AI is today applied in a significant range is drug discovery. So for every medicine that comes to market, right, typically there are 4,000 or 5,000 molecules which do not make it to the market. And that is a huge cost of research. So this is where now people have been identifying how to deploy AI to do that research, reduce the number of potential candidates, identify a way to recruit the right candidates, and save billions of potential dollars. Then early detection. There are patterns which doctors cannot recognize, a human eye cannot recognize, but machines can. And using AI to recognize these patterns, improving the accuracy of clinical decisions. So, helping doctors make the right decisions, improve operational efficiency, so reduce costs, bring in automation, automate some of the manual tasks, and cut costs. This is where AI is applied largely today. So, if we look at application of AI in healthcare, right? There is a spectrum. One part is how easy is it to implement AI, and how much of a validation is required. How much of proof do you need before using AI? So the easiest of the spectrum is marketing. It will suggest ideas around better care, give better content, better health articles or blogs to patients, and easy to implement, not much of a risk. Then there is operational, so administrative tasks, staff planning, fraud detection. Then there is financial, so figure out how to cut costs, how to adjudicate claims and reimburse the patients, how to make decisions around salary, benchmarking, and then clinical, how to make treatment decisions, which is the toughest. So this is the spectrum of use cases that are in AI. So fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of people talk about the clinical domain. The largest debate around AI in healthcare is whether AI will replace doctors or not. And it's a sensational topic, right? It's nice to debate that out, but it's important to understand that AI has applications across these other three areas as well, which are easier to implement. A lot of money can be saved today, a lot of efficiency can be brought in today before we get to the clinical one. And for any one of you who is going to work in AI, it's important to understand this spectrum. It's, there are some examples, and I'll skip these examples just uh, in the interest of time. Wanted to talk a little bit about challenges in AI, right? So, if AI is so fascinating, if it has such high application, why don't we see it everywhere today? Right? So, there are a few challenges why people do not use AI. One of the big barriers is cost, right? Any organization who has to implement this has to incur a high cost today. The research will take a lot of time and money. Then integrating it into your daily workflow, right? Finding the right data to train your algorithms, because if you don't have good data, then it's garbage in, garbage out, not able to train. Uh, Lack of executive commitment, lack of skill. So there are many challenges with regards to implementing AI. There is lack of a regulatory framework. So even if someone comes with an AI algorithm, today as an end consumer, you have to decide whether that works for you or not. Uh, it's not as if a government agency is reviewing and saying that, okay, this is an FDA approved or government approved algorithm. And hence, there's a lot of apprehension amongst consumers to use AI. In the US, the Food and Drug Administration has now got a mechanism to validate AI, but it's hard to get that validation. So there is a challenge in achieving that. And then the largest topic is the ethical dilemma, right? The debate on where does a machine stop and a man take over, and what are the broader implications of it. And those are the most fascinating debates, though there are no answers. So we'll quickly go through the six principles and then we'll go into the ethical dilemma. So the World Health Organization has given six broad guidelines on how to use AI, right? So it should protect human autonomy. So the end decision maker should still be a human. It should protect and promote human well-being and safety. Should ensure transparency, explainability. So in marketing, for example, sometimes they just say that, look, this was recommended by an AI algorithm. But in healthcare, the AI has to be explainable. It cannot be a black box. It has to be able to suggest exactly why AI made one recommendation. It has to be transparent. It has to be explainable, and it has to be intelligent enough. There should be accountability, right? So if somebody develops an AI based algorithm and based on that a patient dies, who's accountable or responsible for that? There should be that accountability or responsibility on the developer. It should be inclusive and equal, right? It should be able to cater to all strata of society, and it should be responsive and sustainable. So these are the six principles that exist around AI, and you will be able to appreciate this more with an example of machine-driven cars, right? Or there's ATM machines without cashier. So now there's a huge investment in autonomous cars, and they say they are the future. But probably millions of people will be jobless because today their livelihood is driving cars. So is that a wise decision or not to have an autonomous car? Because it will have an impact, and because millions of people will be unemployed, who will pay for their healthcare, who will pay for their food, who will pay for a lot of things. What if they become jobless and eventually it leads to increase in crime? So these questions still need to be answered. Uh, there is this classic dilemma on a driverless car, right? So imagine a car is driving on the side of a hill at a good pace, and suddenly there is a kid who's playing, and the car is very near the kid, and the car now has to make a decision. It cannot brake, the brake has failed. So the car has two choices: either it will hit the kid and it will kill the kid, or if it takes a different direction, it will fall off the cliff. And then the person who owns the car, who's sleeping in the back, will die. So now the car has to decide whether to kill the kid or kill the owner. And how would the car make that decision? Some developer somewhere will have to code around making of this decision. And should some developer be making that decision on behalf of everybody or the rest of the world? How do you make such a decision? Uh, there is no answer to that, right? Um, how can you put such power in one person's hand on how to decide that based on an algorithm it will kill one person or the other? Uh, so, and this is just one dilemma. There are millions of such dilemmas around which you have to decide as you go deeper into applying AI in day-to-day life. Right. So this is another amazing example. So Amazon, they applied an algorithm to shortlist resumes. Now this algorithm, after using it for a year or so, uh, they identified that was super gender biased. They by default it used to shortlist more males than females. So Amazon said that this is definitely not who we are as an organization. What we can do is we can stop asking for gender. We'll just not ask for gender in the resume. So the algorithm will not know and it will not be biased. Interestingly, that story played forward. And 2 years later, the algorithm was still gender biased because it picked words like executed, promoted, driven, something, something, which typically and fascinatingly were 5 times more common in male resumes than female resumes. And the algorithm was still biased towards shortlisting male people. This was because historically they were more biased towards shortlisting male people. And the algorithm learned from historical patterns. And even if you remove that variable, it just still remained biased. Uh, this has also played very common in racial biases, uh, where if the algorithm is trying to detect the likelihood of a person committing a crime, it will just in American culture detect more black people over white people. But that would not be true. It's just a bias. So there are a lot of data biases that would play out in AI, and they would also inflate and not make the world a better place. They'll make the world a worse place. Then there are data privacy issues. So Mark Zuckerberg, when put on trial, the judge asked him all this, or the senator asked him all these questions, right? That where did you stay? Which hotel? Was it a single bed or a twin bed? Which soap did you use? Which shampoo did you use? At what time did you go to bed? What movie did you watch before going to bed? He was uncomfortable. And then they said, look, you are uncomfortable answering all these questions, but this is what you do to people. You look at all this information, which is so private to an individual, and you use it and you misuse it, right? And how do you prevent such misuse? Then how do you prevent manipulation? So Google and all other ads, right? They manipulate your decision. They pop in at the right time. A lot of times, many of you would have noticed that you would not have Googled anything, but if you're talking about traveling and then on your phone you see some ads popping up, and that means that somewhere the phone is listening and providing all these ads and trying to manipulate your judgment. Um, then using AI to create these deep fake videos, fake images, fake news, and manipulate human opinion based on that. So these are all the downsides that are existing to AI, and these are huge concerns because this would change the world for a worse place and in healthcare and even otherwise. So all these questions also need to be answered, and it's important for all of you to understand that so that tomorrow some of you might be leading AI projects, would be implementing AI technologies which will change the way the world operates, your organization operates. And it's important to have this holistic thought. AI is not just a tool for efficiency, not just a tool for cost cutting. There is a deeper implication to AI. And if you do not understand that, you might end up making some very wrong decisions, right? So it's important to also understand all these implications of AI. So with that, I'll pause. Would love to take questions from all of you.
So can I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead. We'll do both. I think maybe if you can raise your hands, whoever has questions, and
Yes,
then if
I
someone
had
from the coordination team can help, uh, that would be ideal. And other people can also drop in their questions in chat, and we can try to answer as many of them as possible.
So I'll just go ahead with the question. Thanks for taking out time and I know like a weekend morning. So you just mentioned a few times the black boxes, and you also mentioned the the negative aspect of using black boxes, and especially when I was thinking to apply AI models that you were talking in healthcare. We need a lot of open source information, like an open body, which is generally coming in as there is a lot of variation. The variability keeps on going. Like if you talk about Indian system in healthcare, people see it as a very diverse system, and various cases are required for better evaluation. So you also said that black boxes would bring in more of regulatory requirements, and at the same point would provide an opaque perspective, and you can't take much of you don't know where the decision is coming from, so you don't know the responsibilities.
Sorry, just give me a second.
Sure, sir.
Sorry, Rahul. Sorry.
No problem, sir. So basically, sir, like I was talking about the black boxes that you had mentioned a few times, and the opaqueness of the information that we don't know where the decision is coming from necessarily. But at the same time, in the Indian healthcare system, when we talk about the variability, we need various open source information for better decision making and evaluation, as the healthcare network and the environment is too diverse. So how would you arrange such a setup to bring out the cost like at a lower edge without using the black boxes in your AI network? Like how would you do that?
The black box part, right?
Yes.
There is always something which is proprietary, which is your intellectual property, and you would not want to reveal in your algorithm, and that is fine. But at the same time, uh, it is not a black box if at least you give some degree of transparency. Like for example, if you are using a diagnostic AI algorithm, we'll take a simple case. Um, and then you do not need to publish your algorithm itself. But if you have done a study to validate whether it works or not, publish the information that, okay, this is how my algorithm works, and I have seen it working with 80%, 90% accuracy. You also publish the limitations of your algorithm so that the user can make an informed choice around whether to use it or not. The user would know that there are some cases in which it would fail. You put all that information down there, right? You explain how it works, in what circumstances it will not work, and then you are transparent enough for the user to make a decision. Second, there is always a need for a regulatory body. So, in a country like India, unfortunately, every patient has to read up about an algorithm and decide what is best for him or her. Not everyone might be in a position to understand and make that choice. And it's complex as well, right? But if there are industry bodies, if there is a government body who is there to make that basic hygiene governance on their behalf, then the burden on the consumer would reduce, and then it could be deployed at scale. I'll take a very simple example, right? Stock market investing was very, very challenging in the past. It was almost very few people could do it. Somebody would SMS you a tip, and based on that information asymmetry, you would do something. Then SEBI came in. SEBI, as a regulator, put in rules, right, that stocks have to disclose a lot of information. All the garbage stocks who do not follow basic compliances will be just delisted by SEBI. So you, Rahul, as an individual, don't need to worry about it. If it is listed on the stock exchange, at least basic governance has been checked by SEBI. Then it forces them to disclose information in a simple way, give some basic information out for free on their website. So these kind of things will again in AI will again help, right? So that there is some signaling that, okay, if Rahul has published an algorithm, there is some basic check done by so and so government authority. Now there is still choice. The customer has to decide. There is still information available, but basic bogus stuff has been removed. So more people can access it.
So when we talk about open body, and what I understand of the open body system, which is an integral part of black boxes, is that basically when there's an interaction between the environment and the device, when the AI is taking up it as an intelligence which is there. So how like you would keep a check on what information is coming in, because the decision making is quite spontaneous. Then taking a decision with the proprietary regulatory requirements in mind, because it is something which the device is doing and not me. So how would you keep check on that?
So there are two parts to it, right? One part is validation, right? So there is something called as not only validating the algorithm, but you do something called as computer system validation. So CSV or CSA checks that consistency. So if I give and this happens a lot of time in bad software. If I give you the same data 75 times, do you give me the same result every single time or not? And a lot of AI fails there. So bringing in that kind of system validation helps. There are a bunch of other validations around data, etc., that can be done. And again, regulatory bodies have a role to play here. Second is also limiting the role of an algorithm. So if the algorithm or AI is not strong enough, not proven, then use it as a guidance system. Don't use it as a decision system. So you can use an algorithm as a screening tool instead of a diagnostic tool. It can be used to identify who is high risk individual, but treatment decisions will still be made by a doctor. So AI is not a replacement for your healthcare worker. That also, in my experience, reduces the risk significantly.
So basically, you're trying to say that in like the brain-computer interactions, it could function in tandem with the doctors to take a better decision.
Correct, correct.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks.
Hello, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sir, actually, my question is related to technology in healthcare aspect, not basically relating to AI. So we have seen that the development of apps like Coven and other apps like Arogya Setu has been a boost to our vaccination drive. and it's been widely accepted by the West as well. And recently it became an open platform as well. But sir, don't you think it poses a threat to the data leak? And as according to a RTI filed by some individual, Ministry of Electronic Affairs has said that they are not aware about who developed the app basically. So don't you think we are having this shift pretty too soon in the healthcare sector?
Great questions, Gasham. There is no right answer to this one. Data threat is obviously a huge one, and it's very relevant. It's not trivial. I mean, we in India historically have not respected data privacy too much, but now we get the sense of how important it is, because uh, our daily lives, our existence would be influenced significantly if someone has our data. So these apps definitely pose that threat. But like anything in life, right? The answer to a threat is not to sit back and go back to Stone Age. The answer is to solve that. Right? So we have to have stricter cybersecurity policies and more investment in cybersecurity. The answer is to build better data governance norms. The answer is to have GDPR like policies where an individual has the right to decide what data will stay in a platform and what data will get deleted. And the government has come up with the first round of policy called as Disha for that. In my personal opinion, there is still a lot of scope for improvement there. But the fact that we have a policy instead of no policy is in itself a very encouraging move. So your point, it does pose a threat. There is no doubt about that. But there is nothing like too soon at the same time. We are in a race to become a stronger economy than others. On infrastructure front we are 50 years behind. So a great example, right? So when I was in school, I was fascinated when I read this newspaper headline that will build an underwater tunnel between Bombay and Pune, and that will solve the traffic problems, which are significant. Anyone who has traveled on Mumbai-Pune highway, even the express highway, knows what a nightmare it is. Fast forward 25 years, it has still not happened. I traveled to the US for the first time. There is a tunnel connecting New York and New Jersey. There are two actually. Um, these were built 110 years ago. So we are 100 years behind when it comes to infrastructure. So we have lost that battle. We've lost many such battles, but technology is one such battle which we can win. We can be at par and even better than other countries like US and China. So in my personal opinion, the solution is definitely not holding back. The solution to do is to do it more responsibly, do it in a more stringent and governed manner.
Hello, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. Myself Imtiaz. Sir, actually, as we talked about predictive analytics, so I just wanted to know your opinion on something like we all know the importance of predictive analytics in healthcare, and with each passing day, different developing and developed nations, they are adopting predictive analytics model in healthcare. So even after knowing its importance, if we see in large scale, no country and no nation, even small nations, they are not doing it. So, is there any reason behind it? Like, why aren't we adopting predictive analytic models in healthcare?
So I would say Imtiaz, I would answer in two parts, right? So first part is I don't believe it is not adopted. I think it is adopted, and I would say the definition of any good technology is that it just disappears in the background that you don't even realize you are using it. So Alexa or OK Google or Siri are great examples. Do you even realize that you are using it? It is now in your day-to-day life. I said OK Google and it popped up on the phone. but so you are using it in the background. It just happened to your life. You didn't even realize, and now it's part integral to your life. That is the essence of any great technology. That is when you are truly using it. And to that effect, a lot of predictive technologies nowadays utilized For example, when we go for a blood test and you take your CBC count, right, your neutrophils, platelets, etc. Now, pathologist does not look at those types of results. It's all machine reported. That is using phenomenal artificial intelligence capabilities. 20 years ago, a pathologist was looking at a slide to give you your RBC count or platelet count. It's totally machine driven. But it has disappeared in the background. You don't even realize it is happening. When you go for as ultrasonography, within the USG, there is something called as a Doppler study. So the Doppler study indicates the amount of blood flow through your artery or vein. And that uses a phenomenal AI technology where the sound waves are converted into the amount of blood flowing through your vessels and also knowing the blockage in the vessel. But you don't realize it. It's just packaged so nicely within your routine workflow. So there is AI being used in AI and predictive algorithms being used within day-to-day diagnostics. The successful ones are so well packaged that you don't realize them. The others are noise, which are all these venture capital funded companies which are not being utilized. But time will come, someone more responsible will package them nicely into a technology where it is utilized and you will not even know it. Nations are not implementing it because it's not a nation's job. It's a medical device company's job. It's a software company's job. Nation can buy it. Nation cannot build it. Some technology company has to build it. Uh, but it is being used. TrueNAT, which got used significantly during COVID, but was initially built for other uh, PCR diagnostics, again, has a strong AI-based backing behind it. And it was deployed at scale in India.
What I wanted to know was like, if you talk about US or any other developed nations, they have a statewide EHR system. So in that, like they are collecting data from the patient, not only the patient, everyone who is visiting the hospital or any diagnostic centers. So like one person, maybe the father of the family, he's going and getting some kind of test done from one of the hospitals or some of the diagnostic centers. So maybe he's going through some disease or he has some kind of symptoms which shows that it will be hereditary problem. So with the help of that and with the help of maybe the other family members medical record, the AI can help understand like this person will be at risk for this kind of medical problem in near future, and like that there will be some kind of automated system in place which can help them understand like if you go through this kind of test, you will come to know that you will have this risk maybe in next 5 years or maybe in next 10 years. So like that, sir, don't you think like we can reduce the total number of fatality or total number of medical problems in the near future?
Agree with you on this. It is happening in US to a good extent actually, uh, where a lot of accountable care organizations, right, under the Obamacare, have started doing this, collecting data of the patient and looking at trends and trying to influence them. Uh, what this requires are two very fundamental things. Right? One is great data. So I'll give you an example. All hospitals or states have EHRs, but they are not implemented everywhere. So let's say if I am going regularly for a clinic, but I went to a trip to India and वहाँ पे I had some health incident and discovered that I have penicillin allergy. It is in my file, but it is not in that EHR which is in the US. That got missed. Imagine I change job every second year. So my insurer changed. So my record from one insurer went to another insurer. I changed the city and I went to a different state. My record again got broken. Uh, to carry forward this record across tens of thousands of different systems is not easy. So there is a lot of data loss that happens. So while this system is there, it is not perfect. It has its own challenges because people keep moving. And hence all data is not captured. The second big challenge is human will. I can only tell you that, boss, you are not doing well. You should go for a test or stop eating cake. But most humans, and you will experience this in your career, are fundamentally resistant कि मैं मर जाऊंगा लेकिन साले मैं नहीं करूंगा ये. You give it to me for free, I will die, but I will not use your test, I will not use what you are giving me. You cannot alter human will. So while you might have a great intention, there is only so much influencing you can do. And that also lies with fundamental principles of freedom. I, as a government or a healthcare system, cannot decide whether Imtiaz will eat sweets or not. It is his free will. Because I can suggest, but I can't say कि तुम्हारा 30 की जगह 35% tax लगेगा if you eat more sweets. That is not how we could operate. So if you combine these two principles, great data and the ability to drive human will, at the combination of these two things, there are a lot of implementation challenges that you would face in a nation as diverse as India. Right? How do you get data which not only captures only your top hospitalizations, but day-to-day GP visits? A lot of people self-medicate, so they go to a pharmacy and medicate themselves. A lot of people just do not take any medication, right? A lot of villages do not have that level of connectivity or digitalized systems. So bringing them all into the same loop. And then second, a lot of people just do not want to do all this, right? They are just not interested. Like I have seen in my short medical career, patients whose shirt you open up and there would be like 50,000 warts coming out of their chest. So yeah, when the 5 first warts came out, they could have come to the doctor, but they did not. They waited for so long, right? So this is a classic, and it could be circumstances, it could be lack of willingness, it could be taboos, it could be anything, but you cannot change, unfortunately, all these human factors also. So it's something we all should keep working towards through great systems. But it's also not that it's all this is not happening because no one is working towards it. There are also other factors involved.
So one last question. As you know that with each passing day, the adoption of AI is increasing in healthcare system. So as the more dependency on AI is happening, with that, we are more prone to cyber attacks. So as we have seen that in tech companies also, all these tech companies, even after having massive amount of security in place, they are prone to cyber attacks, and it's happening on a regular basis. So if that happens, like in healthcare system also, how can you make sure that when we have like a good amount of dependency on this AI system, how can you make sure that security is there in place? And how can you make sure that like any rogue agency or any rogue people and their people with ideologies and are not attacking any country or any healthcare system?
A great question, very relevant. I mean, the answer is, I'll start with a simple answer and go more nuanced. Like, the answer is in the same way as you ensure security for anything else, right? Like how you ensure your physical security, how you ensure security against terrorism. You invest in it. That's the answer. So if you are going to use AI, going to benefit from technology, then you have to be willing to pay the price for it. So a lot of people buy a computer, but then install fake Windows. They do not install antivirus software, right? They save that last 1,500 rupees. And that is where you open the aperture for someone to attack you and steal your data and steal your privacy. Same goes for hospitals and healthcare also. There are solutions available. Not all solutions are perfect, but you invest in that. Like if you are living in a house, in a bungalow, then you hire a security agency and they put in 3 or 4 guards, and a robbery can still happen, but the odds of that have reduced significantly. The same here. You invest in cybersecurity software, you invest in cybersecurity agencies, you do regular penetration testing of your software to identify regular kinks, and you reduce the probability of that. That is what you can do at an organization level. And then the same happens at a country level, where apart from the government having your regular military and regular police, also has its own cybersecurity cells who try to prevent these attacks, ransomware kind of attacks at a community level. There is unfortunately no single remedy to it, but we as a society have to invest, right? And slowly we'll be able to overcome that. Some attacks might still happen, but largely like any other law enforcement issue, will have good enforcement around it.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Myself, Mrinalini. I have a question related to use of AI in predictive analysis. So we said that AI will predict the course of a disease which might happen in a long term, like in 5 years or so, according to the risk factor the person has. But this might also put pressure on them that they might feel pressurized because of that, that they can have this disease in long term. So it can have a mental impact on that. So is it a good step, or something can be done regarding that as well?
Great question. I think again, 2-3 principles would be involved here. We go back to those WHO principles, right? So first is it should not impact human autonomy. So I should get that information only if I'm interested in it, right? So it should be my free will that, look, I want to know my risk of having cancer. And then it's not a bad thing because I made that choice. I asked. Now, if it came back and said that you will have cancer, I can't argue that, boss. Why did you tell me? Now you've ruined my next 5 years also. So it's my own choice, and it should be that way. Like, as a government, you cannot declare to everybody that you are going to have cancer. If you can now relate, when you go for your health checkup, when you buy an insurance, the report goes to the insurance company but does not come to the individual because it's a choice thing. Like I have to make that choice that I want to know my chances of having an illness. So that would be the fundamental principle on which this should work. Second, I strongly believe that it would open up new branches of medicine, behavioral care, mental health, social care, as people get to know this information in advance. Because then we've already seen this in last 1.5 years. We are coming up with a big white paper on this with IIM Ahmedabad around mental health and wellness and how that field has evolved. So now it is gaining social acceptance. It is considered to be okay to seek counseling services, social support for individuals who have such identified risks so that they are able to cope up better with it instead of kind of just sidelining that topic. So that would become more relevant going forward as people start knowing their risk and then they figure out a way to cope up with it.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks, madam.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Dr. Parnika Dwivedi from HCM1. Sir, as we know that in India, there is a lot of disparity when it comes to urban and rural, especially in the healthcare field. So my question is, how can we, firstly, how can we make use of artificial intelligence to lessen this difference? And in what ways that can be done? And a follow-up question would be, how can we ensure that people in rural India accept artificial intelligence and make the whole concept of AI less complex for them to comprehend?
Great question. The answer to both of that is by investing in product management around both these areas, right? So the rural and urban divide, if we want to solve that for healthcare software, that has to be the mission for the company who is building that solution. So a lot of companies today, when they go to raise capital from venture capitalists, get funded easily if the solution is targeting the urban middle class, higher class, right? Because that's where the money is. So if these companies were incentivized either by the government or by the investors in a way where catering to rural population also gives them the right funding, the right payments, definitely they would do so. Right? In US, for example, the government incentivizes it significantly. So Mayo Clinic covers 5 neighboring states where there are just remote villages, and they fly in patients using a chopper every single day from those villages and treat them because they are paid for it. So the healthcare system needs to be paid for it, and they would definitely build the right solutions. The same goes for acceptance. For acceptance in rural India, you have to understand rural India. You cannot have an urban solution. You cannot have a Healthify Me calorie counter for a village in UP. The guy is barely having enough calories anyways. It does not make sense for him at all. Right? So the solution has to be relevant. I recently came across this one company. What they do is they work with local pharmacists. They don't work with doctors. And the pharmacist takes the order on their app and delivers it to nearby villages in a 25-kilometer radius. And then whenever the person goes to that pharmacy, sitting at the pharmacist shop, they do a teleconsultation with their doctor in a call center, because the local pharmacist in villages where there are no doctors plays the role of a doctor. He or she recommends medicines. So now that pharmacist, when in doubt, can seek a doctor consultation, and the patient will pay 100 rupees, and out of that the pharmacist will make 30 rupees. So he or she is aligned, incentivized also. And this patient who is not comfortable doing that medical consultation from their home is comfortable doing it sitting in a pharmacist shop. So this type of understanding of how rural India works is again very relevant to then ensure adoption. The same solution which works for cities might not work for rural India. But if we understand their problems and challenges enough, I'm sure they are all willing to adopt these solutions. Everyone wants a better life. Everyone wants better healthcare. You just have to deliver it in the right way.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Bhanupriya and I'm from HCM1. So, sir, yesterday I was going through an article published by IBM Watson Health, and that article stated that AI in healthcare is particularly user-centric. So my question is that I know that AI in healthcare provides communicative aids to patients. So apart from that, how is it more of a user-centric and less of a doctor-centric? Because I believe that AI in healthcare provides a greater authority to doctor in terms of diagnostics and all.
Great question, Bhanupriya. So I think making AI user-centric is things like I suggested, right? Giving the patients a choice. So asking you first of all, like, hey, do you want to know your 5-year risk or not? Right? Providing you that choice instead of just providing you the answer. Understanding your preferences, understanding your budget or the amount you want to spend, understanding all that personal convenience is where AI starts becoming user-centric. And sometimes actually a doctor might not be in the best place. So AI sometimes is user-centric in terms of helping the doctor as well. So a doctor might not always have the time to understand your social circumstances. The doctor might not have time to understand the pattern of your diet or how you take your medicine. But AI, because it's a machine, has the time to study all that and also sometimes help the doctor make a right recommendation. So AI could study that when I gave such and such medicine to Bhanupriya, typically she misses it on every Saturday, on many Saturdays. Now the doctor would never know this. But now the doctor has a very specific information to have a conversation with you. Saying, hey, what happens every Saturday? And then you can say, I go to a mandir and I miss medicine, something, and then we could solve it. So AI, when it is user-centric, it does both. It interacts with the end user better directly, but sometimes it also goes into your day-to-day life where a doctor cannot and gives the doctor only relevant information. Now, it does not tell the doctor all your other habits or everything, right? It only tells you that right insight which the doctor needs to know to have a conversation with you. So it maintains your privacy and yet enables the right conversation with the doctor to personalize care for you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Dr. Pooja and I'm from HCM1. So my question goes like this. There is increasing adoption of AI in various healthcare applications, be it medical imaging, diagnostics, drug discovery, and even the use of sensors to track the health status of a patient. So I wanted to ask if there is a possibility for AI to be extended into the dental field, considering that dental health or oral health is gaining significant importance in a largely populated country like India, and also that dental health contributes significantly towards the overall health of a person.
Absolutely. Great question, Pooja. Uh, I believe there is a strong case for that. I'm personally not very knowledgeable on what is the existing degree of AI penetration in dental health already. I believe there already might be some penetration. Would be unwise to think that there is no penetration. There might already be some. I'm sure there is scope for more penetration. Uh, One would need to obviously invest in identifying the right use case. What part of the job or what pain point needs to be automated through AI? It could be around better diagnosis, providing the right information. It could be around selection of right materials. It could be around remotely checking the dental health. There could be various use cases. I've personally not researched into it, but I'm sure there must already be few applications or few devices that leverage AI. So no reason for us to believe that there is no application. And dental health is now in India also emerging as a field. Uh, Historically, unfortunately, we as a society have not paid as much importance to dental health and dental hygiene, but now there is growing awareness around it. So in the coming years, I'm fairly confident that there will be more and more of such applications that we'll see.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Abhishek Gumbar from HCM1. My question is this. In terms of clinical trials, the AI has minimized the life of human risk. But my question is that the health of people or the genes of people are different from regions to regions. For example, thalidomide, which is banned in US, is still in use in India. So can AI be the we can say that the data we put in the AI is producing the accurate results because there is a lot of difference between the health status of the people from different regions.
So, Abhishek, I would try to say that this is not completely an AI thing, right? I think you don't even need AI to know that thalidomide is used in some countries and not used in others. It's a choice. Uh, Donald Trump was willing to go on war with India for hydroxychloroquine when the pandemic started. And now nobody gives a shit about hydroxychloroquine. Uh, it's like the most underrated solution now. A lot of my relatives paid 25,000 rupees per vial of remdesivir during the recent wave. And still we're very thankful that they got remdesivir. And now a lot of people in India say that remdesivir was totally irrelevant and should never have been used. It's not a data question. This data existed even back then. It's a perception question. How do you control perception? Information does exist, but how do you get the right people to utilize that information, right? Government of India or any regulators never said that people should use remdesivir. It was mostly common men with least amount of medical knowledge recommending each other कि बॉस रेमडेसिविर बाकी सब जोक है मैं तो कह रहा हूँ रेमडेसिविर ले लो मैं तो कह रहा हूँ कि इवन कोविड ना भी हो ना तो एक बार तो रेमडेसिविर ले लेना चाहिए एवरीबॉडी शुड टेक रेमडेसिविर सो unfortunately I mean this is not a technology challenge, it is a challenge of perception, it is challenge of how people make decisions, how government and policymakers make decisions. And in India, the Indian Medical Association, some of the top scientists suggest that HRCT, high resolution computerized tomography, is the best way to decide prognosis of COVID. It is not a part of protocol in the United States or Europe. They don't do CT scans for most patients. Don't both these countries have the same amount of information and data? I'm pretty sure they have. These are published studies based on the decisions they made. So data and AI exist, but the decision makers have to still make the decisions. And this is where someone makes a bet that this is best for me and this is not best for me. There is data published around what the ROI on an MBA, and a lot of debate. Some say that it's the best investment, and some say it's not, right? And then it's you or I who independently make a judgment call. So, in the example you shared, I think it's eventually a human judgment. Data can only take you so far. The last judgment call is still a human one. And in my opinion, that is how it should stay, because then we would all be robots, right? If that last decision was also made on our behalf.
But the sir, human body is indeed complex, and we haven't gotten what the exactly human body consists of till now. But in terms of machine learning, the machine only show those things which we inculcate inside it. So my question was that in terms of clinical trials, some people respond to particular medicine in different way. So that's my question. So we can't say that the AI produce the fruitful results in every time in
I agree.
drug development.
I think AI will keep getting deeper, right, in terms of clinical trials. So nowadays, more genomic information is being introduced into trials, and that now helps AI get more deeper insights around how a medicine will interact in one person versus other. It now incorporates more physical factors also. So knowing your surrounding, knowing your historical background, not just knowing your current medical condition. So as more and more data feeds in, trials will start getting perfect. Uh, and that is happening. Generally, all discoveries take 10 to 20 years to reach the end consumer, but a lot of such personalization based on genomics have started happening. And a lot of old drugs which were considered unsafe are now being brought to the market for a specific niche based on that. So it has happened. It has started to happen, and uh, probably it will make medicine a lot better and safer over the years. Uh, Also, in the meantime, what is important is as you start doing this, like you said, right? It only is as good as the data input we have. So, what is important for researchers and everyone like us to is to understand and clearly lay out the limitations. So, if you don't have all the genomic data in the world, do you stop doing studies? No, you don't stop doing studies, but you lay out the limitations of such a study, and hence ensure that its interpretation is done in a correct way. Somebody does not interpret it as a complete solution. They know the limitations, and they know the future work ahead of them.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Sir, I believe students still have a lot of doubts, but due to
Aditya,
the
we are
time
at time, so maybe we can take one last question,
Sure,
then probably wrap up.
Hello, sir. My name is Rakshanda and I'm from HCM1. So I have this question that with so many advantages of artificial intelligence driven tools, will these tools equip with appropriate protection for high risk patients in mental health care?
Great question, Rakshanda. There are challenges specifically in mental health. It is way more complex than some of the other diseases. Today, where AI stands, actually, it's supposed to be used in very limited applications in mental health. It is supposed to be used for very basic screening purposes, very basic behavioral and pattern analysis. Also, a lot of application exists today at a community level rather than an individual level. At an individual level, mental health is not as a science is not as advanced. There are a lot of unknown factors. So still trained counselors, trained psychologists are the best people to make recommendations. There are some chatbots who claim to play a role, but they could be very dangerous in serious patients. They could play a role when it comes to things like meditation, things like general mental wellness, like you have these apps like Calm and Headspace. But they are for people like you and me, right? Who want to use it as a stress buster, as a stress reliever. But when it gets to serious patients, our understanding based on a study we did recently is that AI is not as advanced to look at serious mental health patients. Pattern analysis is not as advanced. The diseases are not as well understood today.
All right, sir. Thank you so much.
Well, so I think it was a fantastic interaction. I wish I could stay more and answer more questions, but probably for later date. But I appreciate everyone's participation. So this was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of the Corporate Relations and Placement Team of Healthcare Management Program at Goa Institute of Management, I extend my sincerest gratitude towards Dr. Purav Gandhi for coming for this virtual interactive session. Sir, it was indeed a very knowledge-evoking session, and we had a very comprehensive and healthy discussion today. Once again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this session. And it was a pleasure listening to you, sir. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Wish everyone a wonderful weekend.